Hey, Beast and Bible listeners, just a heads up, while this episode deals with some very interesting and even fun aspects of Halloween, there are some very real life and grown up events and themes that are discussed, including real crimes and real violence. So please use discretion. Okay, here we go.
One of the nightmares before Halloween, other than Christian moral panic, is the panic Christians feel to find something fun and acceptable to replace the dark holiday. The classic choice, of course, is trunk or treat, which began as a faith-based alternative in the late 1990s. Churches and schools invite trusted leaders to fill their car trunks with candy, park them in the parking lot, and kids can wander from trunk to trunk without fear of traffic accidents, frightening imagery, or that ever-present fear of poison candy. Another classic option is the Harvest Festival with fun games and food. Costumes are usually allowed within reason. I remember having one at our church school years ago. There was a rule that only costumes from history were allowed, so as the pastor, I wore a plague doctor outfit. Hey, it's scary, but it's historical and saved people's lives, so don't come at me, bro. Arguably the worst choice are the judgment or hell houses that depict scenes of human death and then people being taken to heaven or hell with all the gore of a haunted house, but with the addition of shame and religious trauma. There are alternatives to these alternatives, and one of them was created by my friend and colleague in Lincoln, Nebraska. He and his church have found an innovative way to have fun on October 31st while sharing Christ, all while avoiding the cringe that Christians are so skilled at. This episode is called Light Up the Dark. I'm Dr. Seth Pierce, and welcome to the final episode of our first Halloween special on Beast and Bible. Thank you, Pastor Michael, for being on the podcast today.
Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here with you, even though we are states apart now.
Yes, I know. We just moved half a country away, so it's good to see your face. And I've enjoyed working with you, not just when we were in school together, but also as we were ministering in the Lincoln area and in the Kansas, Nebraska conference. So let's get it started. How did you celebrate Halloween growing up, if at all?
Okay. Well, growing up, I wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist, but did grow up in a Christian home. And I think that the majority of folks my age, probably pretty similar to how we handled Halloween. My parents were church-going folk, but they weren't spooked off by Halloween. And so we did trick-or-treating. I dressed up with those horrible plastic masks that you had two little nose holes that you couldn't breathe out of.
Or see.
You couldn't really see. It was, probably dangerous just more for walking into things. But we did trick-or-treating, we lived out in the country for most of my childhood. So we actually would drive around instead of the actual walking through a neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
I dressed up like superheroes, dressed up like Star Wars people and did that. And it didn't really think too much about certainly the origins of Halloween and those things. We just had fun with it. It was a day that I got to go and have fun and get candy. And so that's what we did as a kid. Certainly as I got older, got to be a teenager, that stopped. And eventually you can't go trick-or-treating anymore when you get too old.
They get a little suspicious when you have like a beard and you're showing up with your pillowcase or your bag wanting some sweets. Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
Cool. So over the years, how has your approach to the holiday changed?
Well, going on from there, when I became a youth, we still did a little bit with Halloween. Then it became fun to go to the, quote, haunted houses where people are dressing up and scaring you and stuff. And I remember the first time I ever went to one, I think I was an 8th grader. And for some reason, my sister, who was 4 years older than me, was very gracious enough to take her tag-along brother with her and her friends. So there was a group of us going up and we were going to the scariest haunted house in Des Moines. And so you stood in line for like an hour to get into this place. And it's a spot where, people are dressing up as ghouls and stuff jumping out at you. We wait an hour to get in there. We get up, and then to get in, you have to duck down and crawl to begin. And I think there were 2 guys, 2 girls and me that were going in. And the one girl was like, no way. I can't do it. It's claustrophobic or something. She's like, I will wait for you guys out here. I'm not doing that. And so she stayed out. So 2 guys, my sister and me, we all go in. And the one guy, Kevin, older guy, had been through it before. So he was kind of guiding me. He was saying, okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen, kind of helping me through. And we going through, people are jumping out, getting scared. It's all, crazy. Until we go into this one room where this gal that's in there to scare us is dressed up like a witch. And she turns on the flashlight and and Kevin just completely disarmed her. He's like, get out of my way. And she turned her light off and it was pitch black in that room. We couldn't see a thing. And so we're reaching around trying to find our way out of this. And when I get nervous, I talk a lot.
Okay.
I'm like, how are we going to get out of here? And sort of trying to find our way out. And so I bump into my sister and I start holding her hand. And I'm talking to her. I'm like, why doesn't she turn our light on so we can get out of here? What's going on? How are we going to get out of here? Just talking. And then all of a sudden, I hear from across the room, my sister say, Michael, who are you talking to? And I'm like, wait. What?
Yeah.
I realized that sneaky girl was just holding my hand the whole time. So I was like, and slapped her hand and just took off running and happened to bust my way into the way out. So we did a lot of haunted house type things when I was a youth and young adult, and didn't really think too much about it until later in life, becoming a Christian, beginning to study the Bible. And then it was just, Halloween was something I just didn't really want to mess with, didn't really want to do with it, didn't take my kids trick-or-treating when they were young. But that was I wasn't opposed to it. I wasn't, talking bad about people who did. It just wasn't anything that we were going to do.
So not like a major moral stand on it, just saying that's just not what we do. Yeah.
That was kind of where we were at.
So, and it sounds very, very similar, what you've been describing, growing up, just trick-or-treating. I remember Dad in the car, until we could get old enough, to kind of walk on our own. We were earlier teens and it was fairly safe. And then going through the county fair haunted house and the pumpkin patch haunted house. And all I remember, I never remember being scared in there. I remember there's always a lot of strobe lights. I always had a headache. I almost would have preferred like somebody scare me because but turn the strobes off. Like it's blinding. And then I also remember one haunted house sounds similar. It was in the Midwest. It was in a place called Paul Bunyan Land in northern Minnesota. I think it was the first one I went to. And they had this dark room or dark hallway. And the way the hallway was set up, it was like zigzag. And so it was funny because you hear thumps and owls because people it was such a narrow passageway and you couldn't see. And so people were like banging into the walls. So you couldn't run through it. And people tried. And then you heard them, getting injured and maimed in the background. So it kind of added the ambiance, the screams and the everything else. And they were very real and natural as people running into things. And and then, as we get older, you have to stop. So mentioning becoming a Christian, and of course, you're a pastor now. Can you share a little bit about your journey into pastoral ministry?
Oh man, yeah. Certainly wasn't my plan. It wasn't my dream to be a pastor. And in fact, if you would have told me back when I was 20 years old that yes, someday you'll be a pastor and you'll have lots of ties, I would have just been horrified by that. That would have been
mandatory. You got to have those ties.
Yeah, that would have been a scary situation. But what happened in my young adult years was when I was, and Seth, you know this, I was wild and crazy before you met me. You didn't ever get to see that side of me. But in my college years, my friends and I were as wild as it gets. If anybody's seen movies about crazy party life of college, that was me and my friends. I had long hair, which today is not that big a deal. But back in those days, having hair down past your chin or down your shoulders my parents weren't loving that look, but that was living that lifestyle. Graduated from Iowa State University and worked as a rock and roll DJ for several years, which was my dream job to work in radio. And I was very happy. I thought this is, I still believed in God. I don't think I ever let go of my belief in God, but it didn't really affect my life that much. And until my dad gave me some videotapes of a Revelation seminar. So that's how old I am. They were video cassette tapes, not DVDs, cassette tapes. He gave them to me and I started watching them. And I was intrigued because I'd heard a lot of sermons through the years and I'd been bored through a lot of sermons. But I was, for some reason, interested in this. It was going over things that I hadn't studied before. And so I began studying the Bible and did it all kind of on my own with those videotapes. I got lessons and I did them all on my own. I went through them twice. And so I didn't realize at first that I was studying and learning about what the Seventh-day Adventists taught from the Bible. Some of the things I loved. It was, very exciting to learn that there wasn't an ever-burning hell talked about in the Bible, that God wasn't going to punish people for endless millennia for the mistakes of 70 years. That was just so excited to hear about that. Some things were more challenging because it was affecting how I was going to live. The one Bible verse that I wrestled with the most was 10:31. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Oh, Seth, I hated that verse at first. It's like, no, leave me alone. I want to believe in God, but I want to do what I want to do, and I want to drink and want to eat what I want. Yeah. So it was a struggle and going through things. And eventually I got that dream job that I wanted. And so I thought I should, give this whole church thing a try. And so I figured out I was learning about Seventh-day Adventism. And so I opened up the phone book to see if there was one in town. There was. And so one Saturday morning, in walked the rock and roll DJ with his long hair, leather coat. And I think I stuck out of the crowd just a little bit. Church in Iowa, Fort Dodge, Iowa. I walked into there and they said, "Who are you?" And I told him who I was. And I tell you what, you would expect that would be just a recipe for disaster. To send a guy like me into a tiny Adventist church in the Midwest that should not have worked. Those folks were so good, and they loved me into the church. They were patient with me. So from that first Bible study until I was finally ready to get baptized, it was 4 years of a journey.
Yeah.
And when I finally got baptized that day, I remember thinking, it's finally over.
Yeah.
God has done it. It's finally over. I'm getting baptized. This is great. And the pastor baptized me, and then he gave his sermon. In the middle of his sermon, the guy looked me straight in the eye and he said, Michael, I want you to realize something. It's not over for you. And I thought, what is he talking about? What?
Yeah.
And he goes, it's not over for you. God still has plans for you. Not sure. He wants me to be best rock and roll DJ I can be.
Yep.
And then he said, it's also not over for you because the devil still got plans for you too. And he's not going to give up on you. And I thought, ooh, man, I really didn't like the sounds of that. But he was exactly right, because 2 weeks later, my radio station got sold to a big conglomerate that owned stations all over the country. So us DJs thought, oh man, they could fire us and we're going to automate, or they're going to change our format. What are we going to do?
Adult contemporary music now.
Yeah, switch me from my rock and roll to playing
smooth jazz,
Street Boys, or So we were all terrified, and so I began looking for work elsewhere. This was also especially vexing because I was 2 weeks away from proposing to my girlfriend, and it's nice when you say, will you marry me, to be able to say, and I have a job.
Yes.
And so that summer, I was studying more, learning about spiritual gifts, and I couldn't shake the thought that God had more for me than just talking between songs on the radio, and wrestled with God a lot, but finally thought maybe God wants me to be a pastor. And at first I told God he was crazy, because you needed certain people for that. It couldn't be someone like me. It had to be someone like Seth Pierce. That is what you're looking for.
I had long hair in high school and stuff too. I played in heavy metal bands. That was the same person. Yeah.
But God just, God doesn't give up, and he's a good wrestler. We find in the Bible, God wrestles with people, and I wrestled with him, and he doesn't get tired like we do. Yeah. So I eventually ended up out at Union College after I was baptized. Wife got baptized. We got married, and we moved out to the mission field of Lincoln, Nebraska, where we thought we would be for a couple years and then move back to Iowa. That move back to Iowa has never happened yet, but I did become a pastor and been doing it now for over 20 years, I guess.
Wow, that's awesome. And how long have you been at your current church, Piedmont Park Adventist Church in Lincoln, Nebraska?
I've been here for 13 years now.
That's awesome.
Prior to this, I was down in Kansas City for 8 years. So
nice.
I've been very blessed to be at good churches where people are excited about doing ministry, and places where the one thing I told them is just, let me make mistakes, let me fail, and we'll try things and we'll see what works.
Yeah, that's great. So what is Light Up the Dark, and how did it get started?
Okay, Light Up the Dark is our Halloween alternative that we do on October 31st. So it moves around every calendar year. It's on a different day. And it's an event that started actually not here at Piedmont. We started it when I was down in Kansas City. And it wasn't my idea. Some of the best ideas, some of the best things I do come from church members. And it was a church member who had the idea of doing something on October 31st that would be a safe place for kids and families to come on Halloween. And so we ended up calling it Safe Haven, because that church there in Kansas City was called New Haven. And the idea was not just to put on a carnival. A lot of churches, a lot of schools put on a carnival. A lot of churches will do a thing called trunk or treat, where kids just come and trunks are open on cars, they go through and they get candy. That doesn't thrill me as much. What thrills me is outreach and telling people about Jesus. And so what I liked about this idea was we take all the rooms in the church that we have, and we decorate them as a Bible story or a Bible theme. And so the kids are going through all these rooms, and yes, they are getting their candy, they're getting their treats, that's what they came for, but they're also having an interactive story, just like 3 or 4 5-minute story, or an activity where they're doing something about the Bible. So we've had a creation room, we've had the Jonah room where they're crawling through a thing like being inside the whale. We've had the Jericho where the walls come tumbling down. We did one year, we had the demoniac. The teenagers wanted to do the demoniac who was freed by Jesus. And so we've done some ones that were a little spookier on the spooky side. But the idea was that as kids are coming through and having fun, they're going to learn a little bit about Jesus along the way. And we have bounce houses outside. We started off charging for food, and then we just decided, you know what? We're not going to charge, just make the whole thing free. And if people want to make donations, they can make donations. And so we started that, and we have just had hundreds of people come through into our Adventist church. And number one, they learned that Adventists aren't as weird as they thought.
Yeah.
And number two, they learned that we can have some fun. Most importantly, when they come through, they learn about Jesus. And when they get here, we give them a sack that has some Christian literature in it that's appropriate, age appropriate. We give some to the kids so they can put the candy in. And then we give sacks of literature to the parents too. And so everybody's walking away learning a little bit more, not only about Seventh-day Adventists, but mostly they're learning more about Jesus and how much he loves them.
That's great. And I know just from being a professor as well as a pastor in the Lincoln, Omaha area, the community really appreciates it. It's very well received. And as you said, hundreds and hundreds of people go through there. And I like what you've done because it's almost an interactive Bible theater in a way where it's not just here, stand here, and we're going to lecture you for a while. Right. There's actually interaction happening. And the other thing, it's a nice variation on what I believe is a very toxic practice, which is, and you've probably heard of this, is Judgment House or Hell House, which is sort of the extreme fundamentalist Christian version of a haunted house. And it's basically a religious trauma house is what it should be called. There's actually a documentary in 2001 called Hell House, and it's on Netflix, and or at least it was at one point, and it's incredibly disturbing when you watch it. And I unfortunately at one point took kids through one. I didn't know what it was. I was an intern pastor. I had some lay leaders who wanted to do it. I had no idea. And I remember kids sobbing and freaking out afterwards. Just, and being incredibly frustrated at the whole experience. And so to have something that can retain some of the mystery and, some people might be bothered by the word spooky, but there are spooky moments in the Bible, so you get that excitement, people get to confront, they get that little buzz of confronting something fearful in a controlled, safe place. So they kind of get that experience without being creepy, overly creepy or gory or something where now I have to take my kid to a counselor and they've been damaged. And plus, as you said, learning something about Jesus in a innovative way that isn't just a lecture. So really appreciate the innovative approach. So the other thing with this, and as pastors, we know anytime you do something new, somebody breaks out in hives and panics and freaks out about it. So have you been challenged by parishioners or other Christians on the appropriateness of having a Halloween alternative? And can you share stories?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's not been an easy run at first, especially the first time through is always challenging. So, and I've done that twice now at two different churches. Had to sit down. And I think when people are worried, concerned, the best thing to do is to confront it and talk to them. Give them a chance to hear you out and hear what their concerns are. And I remember one of the first things people said, like, can we do this on Halloween, October 31st? Like, that's the devil's day.
Yeah.
And my reply was, well, who gave it to him?
Right.
and
right.
If it is his day, let's take it back.
Right. No, it's funny. We mentioned on a previous podcast in this special, one of the things we deconstructed is the idea it's Satan's birthday. I'm like, first of all, it isn't. We have no idea, when Lucifer was created. And we pointed out that comes from actually a comic book in the 80s by Jack Chick. That's not anything. And but I'm glad you pointed that out because it reinforces that idea. Some ideas we have about this day that get embedded in our cultural imagination that really anything. Right. And as you know, one way people have taken the date back, it's also Reformation Day when the Protestant Reformation's, when Luther nailed his 95 Thesis on the door.
Exactly. So it's a day that we as Christians have something exciting to talk about. But I told people, I said, no. And here's the thing that really got me on this idea is it used to be when I was growing up, there was a whole lot of people that went to church, but there were people in your community who didn't, except for a couple times a year. A couple times a year, people would go to church, typically Christmas time and Easter time, right? Yeah. Those days are kind of done. I mean, we may see a little bit of a swell. There are people who don't go to church any time of the year. Correct. And so I told them, since that's the case, if the only day of the year that I can get to talk to people about Jesus is October 31, then we're going to do it on October 31. I've had people suggest, well, we could do it on a different day. And I said, then it's not an alternative. The idea is that we get people to come here instead of going out to the nasty places or to go out where it's not safe, right? There's sometimes that, horrible things about, razor blades put in candy and stuff like that. Right. Let's give them a safe place to go, to have fun and to learn about Jesus. And what's been amazing is, Seth, as you mentioned, is we've gotten known for this in the community. We've had members who tell me, I overheard two people talking in the community, didn't know me. They were talking about going to Light Up the Dark. This is awesome. And that's why when I came here to Piedmont Park, we changed the name. We couldn't do Safe Haven again. We did Light Up the Dark at Piedmont Park. because the idea is that we are sharing God's light on this day that has been a day that has been kind of a dark day where most Christians for years would be like, turn off the lights. We're going to go downstairs. If anybody knocks, we'll pretend we're not here.
Right.
Or others have been like, when they knock, we'll give them a track.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're looking for. Or we'll give them raisins.
Yeah, which is the worst. That's the worst Halloween move anybody could ever do. Do not hand out raisins or toothpaste. Yeah, don't be doing that.
And so you have to fish where the fish are. You have to go where people are at. And so that does mean, yes, we have some treats and stuff. We try to have healthy treats as well, if there's anybody who wants that. But we've done it, and on the years we've done it, at least here at Piedmont, we would do it for about 4 hours. We started off from 4 until 8, which is a long time to do. But we would have on any given time 800 people that would come through and register and be a part of it. And well over half, more than half, were community people that we didn't know. And we would get their names, be able to contact them. And we got their names because we'd put them in a thing for drawings and stuff. Yeah. And so 800 people coming to your church, leaving with our literature, learning about Jesus. Yeah. So usually after a year of doing it, then people are okay. And they're like, oh, I got it. I had one German fellow who came in and he, not just German background, he had the German accent still. And he came in and met with me and he goes, I was very uncomfortable about it. And I told him about it and listened to him, told him why I did it. And I could tell that we were just not going to come to agreement. Then the event happened and I gave a report at church the following Saturday. And I showed pictures and I told stories to him and to everybody at church. And I told him this story. This was the one that really turned to people who were skeptical. Was one year we did it, and we had one room that was the woman at the well. And there was a lady there dressed all in Bible garb, and she was telling the story to the kids that they came in. And in the midst of the story, she would turn and say, there was a man who came up and talked to me. And she turned, and behind her was that stereotypical felt picture of Jesus. Yes, with the white and the blue sash. Yes. And she said, and this man, Jesus, came and talked to me. And do you guys know about Jesus? She told me afterwards, and she did that at least for 2 hours and maybe 4 hours, all night long. She did that. She said, Pastor, you would not believe how many kids. I asked them, have you heard about Jesus? How many kids were like, just your head no. She said, I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. And I said, yes, that's why we're doing this. Well, yes, our church kids come and they have a fun time. That's great, but that's not why I do this. I'm not just throwing a party. Yeah. I'm doing this because there are some who are going to hear about Jesus for the very first time tonight. And so when this German fellow heard that, when I preached the sermon, I got done and you go to the back door and you're shaking hands with everybody as they come through. This guy shook my hand and he was a stout fellow and he shook my hand and he pulled me near and he pulled me close and he said, I was wrong, Pastor. And you could have knocked me over with a feather.
It's a rare moment, sometimes in ministry when that happens.
Yeah. Usually when someone is that strong, nothing short of Gabriel showing up.
Right. With a flaming sword. Yeah.
Nothing changes their mind. But so to have someone say like, I was wrong. You keep doing what you're doing was just fabulous. A great moment.
That's incredible. Any other stories? I know you came to my class at Union on Monsters, Faith and Pop Culture, and you shared one, and maybe my memory is failing me, but there was one kind of funny story where you...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, were interacting with somebody who was maybe concerned.
Yeah. Well, one of the funniest ones was the first year we were doing it. I think first or second year. The lady who was in charge of it had some non-church member youth who wanted to do a room. And so like, yes, because very inclusive. Yes, you can do a room. Sure. And so they did. And so now I'm just the youth pastor. I'm not in charge, which is sometimes a nice place to be.
Yes, it is.
Walking down, checking out all the rooms. And I go into this room that these teenagers from the community put together for us. And it was about hell. And it was everything we didn't want it to be.
A robust aesthetic.
I was like, oh no. And so I went down to the senior pastor's office and I knocked on the door. I said, I never thought I'd be saying this, but Pastor, we have a problem with hell here. So we went down and looked at it and we're like, what are we going to do? And so we just prayed about it and said, well, wait till tomorrow. Came back the next day and a lot of their decorations they put up had fallen down because of tape. Oh. And so we looked at it and we're like, these kids are going to think that we came in and tore down all of their stuff.
We vandalized hell.
Here was me and the senior pastor putting things back up that we probably would have been happy to take down. We're like, how are we going to do this? And so we figured out a way to handle it and talk about hell in a constructive way and took out the scariest things. But that was certainly a funny expression on how things went. I had one member who came to me and said, Pastor, the first time doing it, are you going to tell people what costumes to wear?
Oh,
and I said, no, I am not. She's like, but they might wear this, that. And I said, well, first off, I'm going to talk about costumes because if I do, there may be one of our church family members out there that is not planning on wearing a costume or is against that, and they hear the pastor talking about appropriate costumes, their kids are going to be like, but the pastor said that we should dress up. And she was like, oh, never thought of that. I was like, yeah, so we're not. And she goes, but what if they wear ugh? And I said, well, we say here that we accept people just as I am, right?
Right.
Well, we're going to put it to the test because they're going to come in wearing all sorts of weird stuff.
Right.
And they have. Oh my goodness. I'm I've seen the ghouls, the ghosts, the werewolves. Okay. But man, I saw one guy come in and it was such a gross scene. It was like a baby or something coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Like the alien thing. And I was like,
sure.
And I walked up and greeted him. Hey, how you doing? Good to have you here. And just have to be as happy as you can be because we said anybody can come. Everybody's welcome. Come as you are.
Yeah.
We love you as you are. And we're not going to tell someone, no, you're not appropriate here. Don't come. We want them to come in, even if they look ghoulish. You have that attitude all the time, not just on October 31st. So those have been some of the experiences that we've had with folks. But the church now just has really gotten behind it. Because this event takes hundreds of volunteers. It's not just like one or two people on. It takes usually the Sunday before the event to decorate everything, to get it ready. Every Sabbath school room is putting something on. Women's Ministries does a craft room. We've had music there. Food is huge because it's all free. And so people come through, they can get food. And so it takes a whole lot of people to make that happen and then to tear it all down. Yeah. And so the church gets actually, a spiritual high from working together. And to seeing it go and to see all these new people come to our church is just a wonderful experience, what it's been.
That's awesome. Now it's a source of pride. Like it's just what we do. It's part of our culture. Yeah. So just kind of pulling back a little bit and thinking in general in terms of church and ministry and colleagues of ours who might be listening, what approaches, good and bad, have you seen pastors and churches use when addressing Halloween, which is sort of a annual flashpoint, for a lot of churches?
Yeah, we've mentioned a few of them. I see people through the years who've done the trunk or treat, and again, that's an okay event because you're providing a safe spot and you are bringing people to your church, so that's okay. But you never got them in the building, right? And you never. I don't know that you really talked to them about Jesus. So it's an okay attempt, but I think it could be better. It could be more. And I've had a lot of people who've come to Light Up the Dark who have figured out that I was the pastor, and they shook my hand and said, this was the most Bible-orientated event that I've ever been to, something like this. Thank you so much for doing it. That's the thrill for me. I greet people as they come and as they go, and that's what's so much fun. The other thing that we added in here recently, I forgot to mention, is we have a prayer room too. So as people go through, they've got kind of like a passport where they can mark down all the cards, all the rooms that they've gone to on the card, and then they take that into the prayer room, and they get an extra prize that night. And if they want, there's some elders there who will pray with them. And a lot of kids, a lot of families want prayer. And so what a great way to end the night, praying with them. So taking that time to get a little closer to people, I think is wonderful, instead of just come in, thanks for coming, here's your treats. The other thing that I think can be helpful for pastors is, again, not burying our heads in the sand, not just saying, we're not going to have anything to do with it. And so youth pastors trying to find something for their youth to do so they don't go out and do that. But try to find a way to work with what's already in the vibe, right?
Yeah.
Like in the month of October, I think you may have done something like this, like a sermon series on scary stories in the Bible. Maybe you did something like that. Or I've done things like that where, like, look at all those scary stories, the Witch of Endor, demoniac, things like that, and talk about. And then, you can lead up to what's truly scary. Right. And one of the scariest stories in the Bible is the rich young ruler who walks away from Jesus. Yeah. And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Or the saddest verse in all the Bible is in Revelation 20, where it's talking about the millennium and the wicked surrounding the city.
Right.
And I kind of gloss over that real quick because we're talking about the millennium, but where it says, and referring to the wicked, and they were like the sand of the sea. That's the most tragic, saddest verse in the Bible. I mean, I want it to be, and I imagine John writing that just with tears in his eyes, because you want to write, and the wicked were, all 12 of them.
Yeah, yeah. It was Larry. We knew it. That one guy. Yeah.
But that's just tragic. And so you can use something like Halloween to talk about those tragic or sad or scary parts of the Bible, instead of just being like, nope, we'll pretend it's not happening, and not to embellish it, not to get graphic with it. Even when I was going to haunted houses, I always hated R-rated movies. And I always, this time of year, I don't even like TV is like, all these commercials about horror movies. Never liked those type of things. Sure. So it's not to get gratuitous on things, but to just say, let's make sure that we are somehow shining the light in the area that we're at, in our community, to our people, giving them a way to do something good on a day that doesn't have a lot of good stuff happening per se. You'd mentioned other ways. Of course, Halloween is one spot, but there are other spots, at Christmas time. Goodness, let's not just be the people who are anti-Christmas, even if we're like, hey, we get it. Probably not born on December 25th. Fine. Right. But it's a time where it's in the air. And so do a nativity at your church where people can come through and to hear or see the story of Jesus' birth. At Easter time, even though, yes, we know that Easter is probably landing on a time other than when Jesus resurrected. It's convoluted as to how we got that date and moon and stuff. Whatever. Right. People are thinking about the resurrection. Right. Find a way to catch people with what they're looking for and to tell the story again. Look for new ways to tell the old story. Jesus.
That's good. So, very practical question to wrap things up. How can a church start their own Halloween alternative tradition? What sort of advice would you give if people are listening to this and saying, hey, maybe we could take advantage of the season and do something unique? What are some principles?
Yeah, the pastor has to get a group behind him or the leader behind him. Maybe the leader has to get the pastor behind him on this, a core group of people who see that this could be a blessing. The other, maybe even the first thing to do, when I go to a church, the first thing I ask them is just give me permission to fail. Okay. Let me try things. If it fails, okay, we'll stop doing it. But let me try things. And so if you can build that as your foundation, then people won't be so afraid of doing new things. Then you get a core behind, and then you look around to see what's worked. And you can say, like, look at what this church is doing here. Okay, what can we do? Maybe on a smaller scale, but what can we do? Start brainstorming and praying. Oh, one of the things I forgot to mention in this, I'll get back to more on the pathway. One of the most controversial things that happened, Seth, about Light Up the Dark or Safe Haven was, remember, October 31st moves around the week? Mm-hmm. What do you do, Seth, when October 31st, through no fault of my own, happened to fall on Friday night or on Saturday? We do. We had to have a lot of conversations. And so that's one of the best ways to get this thing off the ground is have lots of conversations with those who are for it and excited about it and with those who are terrified about what you're doing. Talk a lot and explain things. And that's what we had to do when it was landing on Sabbath. Yeah. A lot of conversations. I had started off talking with my evangelism committee, and then I took it to the board. And then I took it to the business meeting because I wanted everybody to be able to weigh in on this thing. And there were so many suggestions like, okay, well, let's not sell food. And we're like, yeah, of course. We're not going to sell. Everything's free. Let's do it that way. We solved that. Yeah. But then we had bounce houses. Yeah. Then bounce houses. I had someone who said, like, let's just put on a play. We'll have a play. We'll sit down. And I said, and kids aren't looking for a big, long, hour-long play that night. They're looking to move around, to have fun and do things and get their treats. Right. You can't give them what they're not wanting, or they won't. The only people who will come and stay are your people. We're doing this for people outside. And so I had to have a theological talk about jumping on Sabbath. Right. It's okay to jump on Sabbath.
Yeah. And that's going to sound really weird, for people who are not in, it's kind of fun to kind of pull back the veil for people who are not Adventists and don't have the same concern. But yeah, for the Seventh-day Adventist tradition, the Sabbath and what you do from, sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night is contentious sometimes. Some churches are, hey, do whatever. And others, because they want to keep the day sacred and keep it set apart, will come up with all kinds of things that they believe are perhaps biblical and traditional, and really they're more cultural. But those are really important conversations to have because we all, no matter how we grew up, have things that get embedded in there, and we assume this is the way it is, and we have to re-examine sometimes.
And it's very true. Yes, for some people, it's like that's not even a thing. But for some churches, it was huge. Can we jump on Sabbath? And I said, well, the Sabbath is supposed to be, according to the Bible, a delight. It's supposed to be the best day of the week. And so can we jump with assistance on Sabbath? Yes. That's going to help us jump. Is that okay?
Right.
And what finally got him was this thought. I said, well, what if we didn't? We've been doing this for several years. People love it. The community loves it. What if we didn't have bounce houses this year, but we still did everything else? I'm guessing some people are going to ask, hey, Pastor, why are there no bounce houses? What do you want me to say? Is my answer going to be, well, let me tell you about the Sabbath and how you're not going to like it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And I said, yes, I don't usually go to a carnival type setting on Saturday, but this is about outreach. This is about reaching our community. And one time I had a little boy who had conservative parents who came up to me in the foyer, and he said, "Why are people trick-or-treating in God's church?" And I said, "Well, they're not trick-or-treating. They're learning about Jesus. And they may take some candy home. But the major thing is they're learning about Jesus."
Yeah.
And so back to the Sabbath thing, we talked about it everywhere in order to do it. And there were some people who had helped in all previous years who couldn't volunteer that day. And I said, that is perfectly fine. You follow your convictions. But most people were able to come and volunteer and put it on, and they saw that it was still a blessing. And so we've been able to do it and do it just like always on Saturday, although it is tricky because I'm tired when it's done. The next day there's church service and decorating and stuff. It's not easy to do, but you do have to work people through it. And so even in the process of getting started, don't run ahead of people. If you're the pastor, don't be the shepherd who moves so fast that you leave your sheep back on the field behind you. But you also don't want to move as fast as the slowest sheep as well. You got to move people forward. Leaders have to lead. Take your time with it. Don't be planning it on October 1. If you're going to do something like this, you got to start talking about it probably at the beginning of the year. I got this idea. What if we did this? What if?
Yeah.
And let people talk. And point out where it's been successful in other places.
Yeah. Point
out where it's been biblical, where it's introduced people to Jesus. Telling those stories is what wins the hearts of even our staunch German friends.
Yes.
Kind of on them a little bit. I love German people. I've got German heritage. So
nice.
So I think that's one of the best ways is just conversation, getting people on board. Everybody's going to be on board though, right? Like if you wait for everybody to be on board with a decision, I mean, Israel would have never left Egypt if they took it to a vote and they wanted 100% agreement.
Right.
On that notion, when we were going to have it on Saturday or Friday night for the first time, we voted for it at a business meeting. And there was an older couple, I think probably in their late 70s or so, very committed, volunteered all the time at the church. And when we voted, they voted no against having it on Saturday. Others said, like, let's just move it to a different day. I said, we can't. It's got to be on the 31st or it's not an alternative. And I had a doctor who actually said that too, because I was wondering if I should do that. He said, no, it's got to be an alternative. So that couple voted against it. But vast majority voted to do it. And what was so cool, when the event happened, those two folks were there volunteering, helping. And I thought, whoa, that's what I want to be. When I'm 70, 80 something and I vote against something, but the church says, no, we're going to do it. I want to be the ones, church voted for it. I'm going to support it as best I can. That's the type of person I want to be when I'm retired and sitting in the pew.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Pastor Michael, thank you so much for being on Beast and Bible. This has been informative. This has been helpful. And hopefully it inspires other faith communities to do some creative ministry this time of year.
Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things is God has given us creative minds. So think outside the box. Think of ways to tell the story of Jesus. I mean, it's been around for so long. The story should have gotten old by now, right? And yet it's such a timeless, beautiful story that when we look for unique ways to share it, God will inspire us and he'll be glorified. And that's the key. He's got to receive all the glory in all this. It was his idea. He gave it to someone else. We've run with it. And hopefully it's doing some good in our world that needs to be lit up with some good light.
Absolutely. Thank you for what you're doing and praying all success and blessings as you have another successful year.
Thank you so much, Seth. Appreciate it.
Halloween will likely continue to be both popular and controversial for people of faith. Hopefully, we can agree that, whatever our feelings may be, the spreading of false information doesn't serve the faith well. Additionally, ignoring a season where people might be open to discussions about issues related to death could be a missed opportunity to share hope. It's also a time to remember that, unless Jesus returns and makes the world new, all of us will face death. In light of that reality, how should we live now? What really deserves our attention and energy? However you choose to celebrate or not celebrate the Halloween season, may your light shine in the darkness. Thank you for listening to Beast and Bible, and keep an eye out because you never know when announcements for Season 2 will come creeping up on our social media.
Beast and Bible is written, researched, produced, and hosted by Dr. Seth Pierce. Ethan Geck is our editor. Logo design and social media by Chelsea Ernina. Equipment and tech help from the dynamic duo James Gigante and Stephen Husett. Producing and project help from me, Heather Moore. Thanks for listening to Beast and Bible. Tell your friends about us, and don't forget to leave a nightlight on after dark.